On a fateful Thursday evening, I came home to find Gerald already waiting for me in his dark red leather armchair, his so-called throne. In a voice that was terrifyingly calm, he accused me of being deceitful and sneaky. He grabbed black trash bags, marched upstairs to my room, and swept away everything I owned: my clothes, the charcoal portrait sketchbooks my teacher once praised, and my worn old novels. He yanked my grandmother's keepsake blanket off the bed, the only thing that had made me feel loved after she passed away. All of it turned to ashes in just 4 short minutes. As thick black smoke rose from the burning pile of clothes and sketchbooks, the entire world of a 17-year-old girl, my father stood there holding a garden hose, protecting his perfectly manicured lawn as if it were the kingdom of a dictator he had built himself. "This is the price of disobedience," he declared coldly, watching me walk away from the house with nothing. I grew up in a home where fear was more familiar than laughter. My father always believed that harsh discipline was the best way to raise a child. But to me, what he did was never guidance, it was control and humiliation stretched over years. He constantly criticized, belittled, and compared me to others until I slowly began to believe I was useless, that I had no worth at all. Everything I owned was considered a luxury in his eyes. A simple notebook, an old shirt, or a few small keepsakes could all become excuses for his anger. I lived cautiously, constantly afraid that even the smallest mistake would be enough to make him explode. Some nights, I lay curled up in my room, wondering what I had done wrong to deserve a life like this. The breaking point finally came. I had just returned from work when my father called me out into the yard. There, all of my personal belongings had been piled into a large heap. Without a flicker of emotion, he set it on fire, saying it was his way of teaching me a lesson about humility and gratitude. I stood frozen, watching familiar pieces of my life, clothes, books, photographs, disappear into ash, one by one. The sharp stench of smoke mixed with the damp smell of rain made it hard to breathe. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had gone beyond what tears could express. In that moment, I understood something clearly. If I stayed, I would lose myself completely. That night, as I gathered what little remained, my mother, Patricia, slipped quietly into my room. She handed me an envelope containing my birth certificate, my social security card, and $340 money she had secretly saved over the years from the grocery budget. "Go, don't come back," she whispered. It was the only act of defiance, and the bravest one from a woman who had lived in fear for far too long. I climbed out the window, walked to the house of our kind neighbor, Delano, and left Ridgewood Drive behind, carrying with me one unshakable belief: I would rebuild everything on my own. No goodbye, no resentment, just a silent vow echoing in my heart. I would build my own life, and one day I would stand firmly on my own 2 feet without needing recognition or pity from anyone. In those first days after leaving home, I had almost nothing besides a few changes of clothes and a small amount of saved cash. I rented a cramped room with peeling walls and a window that let in only the thinnest sliver of sunlight. But to me, it was the first space of freedom I had ever known, a place without shouting, without contemptuous stares. I threw myself into work as a way to outrun the past. I worked full-time during the day and took on extra jobs at night: delivery shifts, cleaning, anything that could bring in money. Some mornings, I returned to my room just before sunrise, my body exhausted, yet my mind refusing to let me rest. I knew that if I slowed down even for a moment, I might be dragged back to the starting line. Whenever I felt completely drained, I remembered the pile of ashes in the yard that day. That image became my fuel. I told myself that I couldn't let the pain be meaningless. I had to turn it into strength, into the foundation of a different future. I began learning new skills, using every spare minute to improve myself. Every small certificate, every opportunity for advancement, I held on to tightly. Gradually, my life stabilized. My income increased, yet I kept my strict saving habits. I didn't indulge in luxuries or allow myself to waste money because I carried one clear goal in my mind: I had to become strong enough that no one would ever trample on me again. Even so, the long, lonely nights were unavoidable. There were times I longed for a word of encouragement, a comforting embrace. But eventually, I understood that this journey required me to become my own source of strength, and in that solitude, I began to grow little by little. After nearly 2 years caught in the relentless cycle of work and study, I started to see my first real achievements. I was promoted. My salary increased. I was given opportunities to take part in major projects. For the first time, I felt that my efforts were being recognized. But more valuable than money or status was the confidence I gained, something I had never truly possessed throughout my childhood. I moved into a small but brighter apartment, a place that finally made me feel safe and at ease. Whenever I sat in the quiet of that room, I would think back to the days I lived in fear, and it made me appreciate the present even more. I was no longer the trembling child under my father's glare. I had become an adult who knew what she wanted and what she deserved. And yet, no matter how much my life improved, the memory of that rainy afternoon never faded. Whenever exhaustion crept in, I would remember the pile of ashes and the cruel words spoken over it. It no longer wounded me, but it reminded me that turning back was not an option. It was during this time that I set what seemed like an almost insane goal: to buy back the very house where everything I owned had once been burned, not out of revenge but to close a chapter of my life. I wanted to prove to myself that I could rise from the ashes and rebuild everything. I threw myself into work with a renewed determination. I cut every unnecessary expense and poured all my savings into that single goal. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't go on, but I clenched my teeth and kept moving forward. If you've ever been looked down on, hurt, and are fighting every day to rise above it, comment 1 to give yourself a little extra strength. You are not alone. 3 years passed in a whirlwind of discipline and relentless momentum that I imposed on myself. I didn't allow a single careless day. Every morning began with a detailed plan. Every night ended with a careful review of every expense. My life revolved around work, study, and saving. Social gatherings, vacations, personal pleasures, all of it was pushed aside. I understood that to reach my goal, sacrifice was unavoidable. There were times when I watched my friends enjoying their lives and felt a quiet ache, but I always reminded myself why I had started. The image of that pile of ashes never stopped resurfacing in my mind, warning me not to be weak. Through persistence, I gradually advanced in my career. From an ordinary employee, I became a project manager, then a team leader. My income increased significantly, yet I maintained a simple lifestyle. I learned how to invest, studied real estate and finance, and step by step built a solid foundation for my future. One day, while scrolling through real estate listings, I stumbled across a house for sale that looked painfully familiar. The address made my heart skip a beat. It was my father's house. According to the listing, he had used the property as collateral to borrow $85,000 for Garrett's auto repair shop, Thornton and Son. Garrett, the golden child, had overspent recklessly, hired too many employees, and eventually driven the business into the ground. Now the house was being rushed onto the market to cover the losses. I sat in front of the screen for a long time. Memories flooded back, sharp, bitter, heavy. But woven into them was something unexpected: calm. I realized that the moment I had been waiting for all these years had finally arrived. And this time, I was no longer the powerless child. I didn't contact anyone right away. For days, I thought carefully about whether I should step into that house again. It carried too much pain. Yet it was also the place that had shaped who I had become. In the end, I understood something important. If I kept avoiding it, the past would always haunt me. I had to face it to truly close the chapter. I reached out to the real estate agent and scheduled a viewing like any ordinary buyer, keeping my identity to myself. When I stepped through the familiar iron gate, my heart trembled slightly. Everything seemed the same: the old brick pathway, the starfruit tree in the yard, the front steps worn down by time. But I felt different. There was no fear anymore, only a quiet sadness. Inside, the house felt emptier than I remembered. Much of the furniture had been sold. The walls were peeling, the air felt heavy. I walked silently from room to room as memories crashed over me like waves: the corner where I used to curl up at night, the yard where my belongings had been burned to ashes. Every detail stood before me, painfully clear. When I stepped outside, I knew my decision was made. I would buy the house. Not for revenge, not to show off, but to prove to myself that I had overcome the past, that I was strong enough to return to the place that once broke me without trembling. The contract signing was scheduled soon after. I chose to keep everything private, telling no one. Inside me was a strange mix of emotions, anticipation and calm woven together. I knew that moment would close an old chapter and open a completely new one in my life. The day finally arrived. I walked into the notary's office with an unexpected sense of peace. In my hands was the money I had spent years saving, every dollar earned through sweat, exhaustion, and silent tears. As I waited outside the signing room, I faintly heard my father's voice from within. It was the same familiar voice, but now tinged with fatigue and anxiety. When the door opened, his eyes met mine. He froze. For a second, he looked as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I stood there calmly, nothing like the timid child I once was. The real estate agent introduced me as the buyer of the house. The simple statement caused a heavy silence to fall over the room. My father stammered, asking again as if he had misheard. I nodded, saying nothing more. His face turned pale. His hands trembled slightly. Perhaps in that moment, he truly began to understand the weight of what he had done in the past. The signing itself was quick. When I placed my signature on the final document, I felt an enormous burden lift from my chest. There was no triumph, no gloating, no overwhelming joy, only relief, only peace. I understood then this was not revenge. It was freedom. Before I left, I looked at my father one last time. There was no resentment, no anger, only the calm of someone who had walked through pain and come out the other side. In that moment, I understood that I was truly free. Comment 1. You deserve to be proud of yourself. After the contract was signed, I didn't move in right away. I left the house empty for several weeks, a necessary pause, giving both my father and me time to face our new reality. I knew that for him, losing the house was not just a financial blow, but a deep emotional shock. But this time, I felt neither pity nor anger, only a quiet understanding. One afternoon, he called me. His voice was lower than I had ever heard it, stripped of its usual hardness. He admitted he had never imagined a day when he would stand before me under such circumstances. He confessed that for years, he had used harshness and control to mask his own insecurities. Those words did not erase the past, but they opened a door at least to conversation. We agreed to meet at a small cafe. There were no accusations, no raised voices, just silence mixed with awkwardness. He looked at me for a long moment before softly saying he was sorry. It was the sentence I had longed to hear throughout my childhood. Yet when I finally heard it, I didn't feel hatred dissolve. I simply felt lighter. I didn't rush to forgive him. I told him I needed time, and that he also needed to learn how to respect my boundaries. We agreed to start over slowly, without pressure. We didn't need to become a perfect family, we just needed to learn how to listen and understand each other. On my way home, I looked up at the evening sky glowing with soft golden light. For the first time, I truly felt peace spreading through me. I knew the healing journey would still be long, but at least I had taken the first step, stepping out of the past and toward a lighter future. When I officially moved back into the old house, I began an entirely new chapter. I decided to renovate every corner, not just to refresh the space, but to clear away the heavy memories that had once taken root there. Every wall repainted, every piece of furniture replaced, felt like I was rewriting my own life story with my own hands. I transformed the room where I once curled up in fear into a space filled with light. I placed a desk by the window, added a few green plants, and hung artwork I loved. Each morning I woke up there. I could feel the difference, no anxiety, no haunting shadows, only peace and freedom. I also spent time caring for the small backyard garden. The old starfruit tree still stood there, silently witnessing every rise and fall. I trimmed its branches, planted flowers and vegetables. In the late afternoons, when the sunlight softened, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and listen to the wind. Those simple moments helped me reconnect deeply with myself. Gradually, I learned how to forgive, not to erase the past, but to free myself from the emotional weight it carried. I no longer allowed anger to guide me, nor did I let old wounds control my present. Instead, I chose to live with gratitude, cherishing each peaceful day I now had. Some evenings, I stand in front of the mirror and smile at myself. I see someone different, calmer, stronger, more compassionate. I've come to understand that a painful past is not the end of the story, but the starting point of a deeply transformative journey. And in this renewed space, I have begun writing the next chapters of my life with freedom and hope. Looking back on everything I've been through, I realize the most painful part wasn't the insults, the rejection, or even the betrayal from my own family. It was the fact that I once doubted my own worth. For a long time, I believed I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve love, and that I had to endure every wound as if it were fate. But those dark days forced me to face myself. I learned to stand up straight, to look my fears in the eye, and to stop running from them. I began setting clear boundaries, daring to say no to injustice, and walking away from relationships that drained me. That was the greatest turning point of my life. I now understand that self-respect is not something others grant you, it's something you build day by day. Every firm decision, every time I stood up for myself, made me stronger. I no longer seek validation from those who never valued me. Instead, I focus on treating myself with the kindness and respect I deserve. There are moments when I remember the little girl I used to be quietly curled up in the corner of her room, and I wish I could hold her tightly and whisper, "You were so brave." It was that little girl who refused to give up, who endured every wave of pain so that I could stand here today. Now, I live more slowly, more deeply, more fully. I believe that anyone who has been hurt can rise again, if they are brave enough to begin anew. Because in the end, the most precious gift we can give ourselves is a life of peace and freedom. I've come to understand that the sweetest revenge isn't making someone else suffer, it's living a happy, fulfilling life. When I let go of resentment, my heart became lighter, and life began opening doors I once never dared to dream of. I focus on building my career, caring for my mental health, and nurturing healthy relationships. The people who entered my life afterward brought sincerity, respect, and understanding. They didn't ask where I came from or how deeply I had been hurt. They cared about who I wanted to become. And that made healing possible, day by day. I learned to forgive, not to erase what happened, but to free myself from the weight of the past. When I look back now, I no longer feel bitterness. I see lessons that shaped me. Because of those scars, I cherish the peaceful moments of the present even more. I also spend time helping people who have gone through similar circumstances, listening to their stories, sharing my experiences, and passing on hope. I believe that when one person is strengthened, they will continue spreading that strength to others. Now, I am no longer a victim of my past, but the author of my future. I walk forward with confidence, calm, and gratitude. And if anyone out there feels lost in their pain, I want to tell them this: you are not alone. As long as you don't give up, the light will find you. The moment I stood in front of my father, inside the house he once considered the symbol of his power, every painful memory surged back like a violent wave. The arrogance was still present in his eyes, but beneath it lay a confusion he couldn't hide. He couldn't believe that the child he had once belittled, humiliated, and crushed was now the rightful owner of this very house. I didn't say much. I simply handed him the purchase contract, my signature neatly placed at the bottom of the page. The room fell completely silent. The air felt thick and heavy. The relatives standing nearby looked at me with a mixture of shock and unease. My father's hands trembled as he held the paper. His lips moved, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I saw his confidence disappear. There were no harsh words, no condescending stares, just an aging man standing face to face with the consequences of his own cruel choices. I looked him straight in the eye and said calmly, "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because I deserve a better life." Then I turned and walked away, leaving behind a chapter filled with pain. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath. In that moment, I knew the long, dark stretch of my life had finally come to an end. I was no longer bound by fear,